This is TWiT.
Do you know Gary Rivlin? Do you want to introduce Gary?
No, you should go ahead and introduce Gary.
All right.
But I want to mention quickly that Gary is also friends with our friend Craig Newmark. It's in the book. Yes.
All New Yorkers know one another, I believe, so that's why. That would explain it. Hello, Gary. Gary is a longtime Silicon Valley writer for Wired and the industry standard, if you want to bring back memories of the past. And he is author of many books, including Why is Everybody Trying to Kill Bill Gates, which...
Okay. It's called The Plot to Get Bill Gates.
Okay, all right. Something like that. The plot. Yes, the plot to get Bill Gates. And his newest, which I think is fantastic, is AI Valley. Came out yesterday. He'll be in San Francisco on book tour on Thursday. Menlo Park, California, April 2nd, April 3rd, back in San Francisco, the 15th, in beautiful downtown Albany, New York. So, and March 25th is, was that yesterday? That was yesterday. So we've missed that one at Barnes & Noble in Manhattan. Great to see you, Gary, and thank you for joining us. I appreciate it.
Oh, my pleasure. Looking forward to it.
You talk in the book about how, actually this is in the epilogue, Randall Strauss convinced you not to write the book you were writing, but write this book instead. And I had to know, what were you writing that you abandoned?
I didn't really. I had written a proposal. I hadn't gotten very far with it, but I certainly would have been ahead of the times. I want to do a book about Mark Andreessen.
Oh.
Understanding the Valley for better and for worse through Andreessen's story, and this would have been 2022. By that point, he had shifted towards the right. He hadn't sprinted all the way to the right at that point. So, the problem was that he was so hostile to the mainstream media, I guess what he would call the legacy media, that I knew I wouldn't get him to participate. I had interviewed him before. We had a good relationship, but that was back in the 2000s. And, the idea of fighting for every interview, trying to do the right around, tell his story without his involvement. And then suddenly AI. So this was the end of 2022, right before ChatGPT came out. I just randomly got an email from Reid Hoffman, a batch email, announcing that he was going to co-found his first startup since LinkedIn. And I just was really intrigued, so just kind of had lucky timing.
I'm so glad you can I just add in there? I'm so glad that you made Reid Hoffman central to this, because I think he is one of the good guys in the oft maligned Silicon Valley. He is the connector of Connector, and full disclosure is he helped fund my engagement journalism program. But he's a public intellectual by his own description. He's a good guy and a nice guy, and I think it's just great to see him at the center of how he operates. Yeah,
a billionaire you can root for.
Yeah. Amen.
Well, it depends on what side of the aisle you're on, but yes, I think you're in good company here. Yeah, he's kind of the backbone of the book, and it's Reid bouncing off various people and various companies that becomes the story. It's a history, really, of AI starting. I was surprised back in 1956 with John McCarthy and the first AI conference, and coming right up to the present. Although it's got to be challenging. You wrote the book at the epilogue, I think, is dated 2024. It's the end of the last year. Publishing, being the speedy enterprise that it is, has finally got the book out yesterday. It doesn't seem out of date, which is good, but it's going to be out of date in 6 months or a year. I mean, this is a very fast-moving topic.
Yeah, I mean, I clearly I was well aware of that. For instance, DeepSeek had not come out by the time, or the latest iteration had not come out. But I don't know. I really was trying to tell a different story. I don't think you're going to want to pick up my book to learn the details of Claude 3.7.
No, that's what we're here for. Yeah. That's right. Yeah.
And so I was just trying to tell the story, how we got here, where we're at, what it means through these emblematic characters, Reid Hoffman, as we've mentioned, Mustafa Suleyman, kind of one of the big names in AI.
I learned his nickname in college was Moose, which I thought was very useful.
I don't think he likes it anymore. When I asked him
I
about
doubt
it,
he does.
gave me a funny look and like, yeah, we're not using that anymore. But didn't have to throw that in there. And, and then the usual suspect. In fact, weirdly, the first 2 words of the book, and I wrote the opening, I don't know, a year ago, 14 months ago, are Elon Musk. I start off with this dinner in 2015 between Musk and Reid Hoffman, and Musk by that point had put money in DeepMind, and he saw, I would give him credit, he saw what was starting to happen in AI. He had this weird perspective where he's an investor, and he was also its loudest critic. It's going to destroy humanity. The robots are going to take over, and meanwhile, I own a piece of these very aggressive companies trying to advance this stuff. But so it starts off with a dinner where Musk basically convinced Hoffman, who at Stanford more or less studied artificial intelligence, like, hey, it's time. This is starting to happen. And so that kind of launches the rest of the story with, Hoffman getting involved as he would as a funder, and then ultimately starting his own company.
One of the things that interests me, and so it really is a history of AI, but one of the things that really interested me is how many of these people were not really coders. Many of them weren't even computer scientists. Often they were philosophy majors and the like. Obviously, they could hire coders, but it seems like AI has been driven not so much by people who deeply understand computing, but by people who have kind of a dream. You even mentioned the impact of science fiction. I think Reid Hoffman talked about that in all of this.
That was one of the big surprises to me. I guess I assume, like you assume, that was computer scientists.
Right.
But, it's, mathematicians, right? These things are just enormous mathematical models. But beyond that, a wide range. Philosophers you mentioned, but physicists, a lot of physicists.
A lot of physicists. In fact, the guy we talked to last week is a theoretical physicist. Yeah. And, Anthony, I forgot his name.
Aguirre.
Jeff won't let me forget Aguirre. You actually mentioned early on Future of Life Institute is in the book as well. Yeah.
But cognitive psychologist. It surprised me, but then of course it makes sense. Artificial intelligence is programming, it's computers, but it's far more than that. It's like understanding the brain. The big breakthrough, as I'm sure most of your listeners know, was going from hard coding rules to trying to create these neural networks that mimic the brain. So those who are studying the brain, it made sense. But again, I was like you. I just figured it was computer scientists. What I find most interesting about the history was the absurd optimism of people like John McCarthy, Marvin Minsky, the early pioneers. AI was just around the corner for 70 years. You'd read what they wrote in the 50s, you'd read what they write in the 60s or 70s, and they were always just a few years away. And of course, they were more like 50 years away from where they thought they were.
That one of the things I like about the book is really getting to kind of almost meet these personalities. I didn't know, for instance, I had long thought highly of Marvin Minsky, but I didn't realize he really, in some respects, computer scientists in general steered AI wrong for a long time. At least 2 or 3 of the AI winters were because Minsky had insisted, no, you've got to do symbolic rules-based AI. Trying to mimic the brain is a mistake. And he really influenced the AI community for decades because of that.
He mocked people who were pushing the neural networks. I call it like a 50-year mistake.
Yeah.
On the other hand, computers weren't powerful enough, back in the 90s, 2000s, to power these neural networks. You had to have several things happen beyond the realization that neural networks was the way. There wasn't enough digital data, to train these models. So, it was a wrong turn that lasted around 50 years. But on the other hand, I think if there wasn't that wrong turn, there still would have been a long, long delay before we got anything remotely like we would get in the second half of the 2010s.
We couldn't have had the internet we couldn't have had AI or generative AI without the internet, right? Without the access to the complete compilation of human speech.
Yeah, the digitalization of everything.
Right.
You talk about Frank Rosenblatt, who was kind of widely considered the father of these neural networks, and his first machine, the Perceptron. This is in the 60s, right? And I think Rosenblatt ended up being kind of cast aside because of Minsky, saying, no, there's nothing there. These neural networks, they aren't going anywhere. It's kind of a sad story, really.
Yeah, I think that's kind of a not so uncommon story. The lonely pioneer in the wilderness, who's the true believer, and others are mocking them. They're not believing them. But Rosenblatt himself, it's funny. We all came of age, all of us on this call, around writing about tech, more or less the same time. And, I kind of thought concepts like vaporware were relatively new. This idea that you sell the concept before you've built, or you sell the product before you figured out the product. But that was Rosenblatt. I mean, he was piling it up, just making claims that were not true. And so, I think he got himself in trouble by overpromising, as many others, Minsky included, would do around AI.
1958, New York Times. New Navy device learns by doing. The New Yorker. It strikes us as the first serious rival to the human brain ever devised. I'm quoting from the new book, which is a must-read, Gary Rivlin's AI Valley. There it is. I told him every time I say that, hold up the book.
Out today.
Out today. So at what point did people start to suddenly realize, no, symbolic... And by the way, we had Stephen Wolfram on not so long ago, and he said, no, he's still in that mindset, but neural networks can't do it all. We need symbolic AI. It's going to be some combination of the two. Of course, his Wolfram Alpha is essentially symbolic AI. At what point did people start to say, no, you know what? This neural network has promise?
Well, there were more lonely pioneers, famously Jeff Hinton, a few others, who were pushing this for,
He's the
90s.
father of modern neural networks, isn't he, Jeffrey Hinton? Yeah,
I would say the same thing. They're the three godfathers, but to me, Hinton is first among the equals there. But it was like in the 2010s, the first half of 2010s. That's when it really started to pivot. There was the famous ImageNet contest. Feifei Wu from Stanford had this contest, and that's when famously Jeff Hinton and a couple of his graduate students, entered the contest with a neural network.
Ilya Sutskever, among others. Yeah. Yes, that's right. Yeah, and
they bested all the rule-based models, and that really got people's attention. The idea that rather than putting down the code, this is a cat showing a million pictures kind of thing. This was like, set it loose, let it read, and it could more accurately identify animals than any of the rule-based systems. So that really got people's attention. But, this is science. It does move slowly. So it was 2013, 2014, 2016. And, I feel by then that neural networks became, the main focus for most people. Then the famous Transformer paper, the T and GP ChatGPT came out. What was that, 2016, 2017?
Yeah.
I don't remember.
Yeah.
And
2017.
And that really showed the potential for these chatbots. Something I did not know until I started doing this research. Artificial intelligence has been around for a long, long time. We've been using it. We just didn't know it. It's like, in the 2000s, Google was using it to figure out how to price their ads. Google Translate's been around since 2015. That's AI. But generative AI, this idea that you can talk to a chatbot, that you could ask it through a prompt to make a drawing, to make a video, that really changed things. So to me, the Transformer paper coming out was the beginning of the revolution that we're now all seeing, or the general public is now seeing.
I have a question about the Transformer paper. Before that, I want a little defense of Wolfram Alpha, Stephen Wolfram. He says that that neural networks can't do it all. And the reason he knows that is because the best chatbots, you ask them certain questions and they're like, we better ask Wolfram Alpha. And then they kick over to, and Wolfram Alpha figures it out and sends it back. But anyway, the transformer architecture, I've always been fascinated by that pivotal moment in 2022 when OpenAI opened this thing up. Do you feel like Google or some of the other companies felt blindsided? I mean, all these companies have been working on these things and felt like it wasn't ready for the public. It wasn't ready for prime time. It might be a little dangerous, all that kind of stuff. And nobody was really publishing public access to their tools. Then the revolution hit when OpenAI had the boldness to actually do that, based in large part on Google's work with the GPT concept. So, do you have a sense in the industry of what the other companies were thinking when OpenAI did that?
Yeah, that was a big part of my reporting. I blame it on Tay. I don't know if you remember this.
Oh, yeah.
That was the Microsoft bot that decided that Jews started 9/11. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Holocaust denying.
Yeah.
And, so Microsoft puts this thing out. It was trained more or less on social media.
That's the problem. Of course, people gamed it immediately and said, let's see if we can turn this into a Nazi.
And they pulled it, within 24 hours, and Microsoft immediately pulled it, and it was like this specter hanging over all the big tech companies. They're all so Google had they called it Mina. It would change names, but they had Mina in 2020, and so Mina was basically ChatGPT, but they were scared of it. You know, there are people, Mustafa Suleyman, main character in my book. And so it was
good shot. That's good. Don't you hold it up longer though. People have to really read the title there.
So we're training Gary.
The book only came out yesterday. He's got a lot of interviews coming up. We're just teaching him. You got to hold the book up.
I appreciate that. And so Suleiman, others inside of Google were so frustrated. We have this amazing thing,
Mina. I don't even remember Mina.
Because they didn't put it out there. And so they, in fact, Suleiman ended up quitting Google and co-founding with Reid Hoffman, Inflection, an amazing company not rest in peace, it still exists, but it had the amazing Pi, which is PI, which is my favorite, was my favorite of all the chatbots. But anyway, it's like, Google was scared of it. Microsoft was scared of it. I would talk to people there and just like, we wanted to just advance this stuff, but it had to be a startup. It had to be a company that didn't have $100 billion in revenues on the line. So I don't think it was any coincidence that the first company that had the daring, or whatever you want to call it, to put this out was a startup.
Gary,
although hold up that book again, because the subtitle is fairly important.
Yeah.
Microsoft, Google, and the $1 trillion race to cash in on artificial intelligence. Because the bitter moral of this book seems to be, you start out like anyone would. Oh, it's going to be the startups. It's going to be the garages. It's going to be the small guys who come up with a brilliant idea. It turned out to be so expensive. It's only the big guys who can play this game, really.
I started this book beginning of 2023, and it was like I was going to tell it all through startups. I'm fascinated by startups. Who isn't, right? Venture capital, the daring, like you have this idea, and this dream of being the next Google, whatever. But I discovered through my reporting, like, it's Microsoft, it's Google, it's Meta. That's my big fear here, that the same tech giants that have been dominating for the last 10 or 20 years are going to dominate AI because it's so expensive. And, you have Anthropic out there with Claude, another favorite chatbot of mine. And, I think they've raised about $20 billion so far, $4 billion or so from Amazon, maybe more by this point, Google billions of dollars. So even if Anthropic wins, they're in part owned by the giants. And beyond that, Dario Amodei, the CEO, is predicted by 2027, it's going to cost $100 billion to train one of these things. Like, there was 160 billion thrown into AI startups from venture capitalists in 23 and 24 combined. $100 billion, like a large venture capital fund is $1 billion. And so I do wonder, in fact, Suleiman, near the end of the book, he concludes that none of these consumer chatbots could make it on their own, that they'll eventually be gobbled up, bought, acquired by, a giant.
This is why Apple is so hopeful, I think, with their now kind of mediocre AI play, but they know that eventually they'll be the only company that can afford it.
And they're on, how many, a billion iPhones? I mean, they have the reach, and that, ditto Meta, Zuckerberg, who, Meta, or back then Facebook and Google, were the two companies working on neural networks before anyone else. They had a huge lead, and they too, Facebook too, was scared to put this out, and so they were caught flat-footed. They were paying attention to the metaverse, etc. That didn't help. They went the open source way. But he made a claim in 2024 that within 6 months will be the most popular chatbot on the planet. And in a way, he's right, because billions of people use his various platforms, and it's available. I would argue like it's available, but only a fraction use it, as opposed to the 300 or whatever million people who actually go to ChatGPT to use their model. But you could be late. I wouldn't count out Amazon. I would not count out Apple, just because they have the reach and they have the funds.
Gary, I'm curious. I'm curious about a lot of things. Let me ask you this: this sense of the need for scale. If you go to the Stochastic Parrots paper, they argued that going for huge models was a folly. DeepSeek, we think, might say that could be the case, that they could be smaller. Is it a case? When I worked for Time Inc., they thought, well, if it costs the most in the world, it has to be the best because we're spending the most money.
Right.
Is there a little bit of that in the American ethos here? Is there a chance that you don't need to be that huge, that you don't really need $100 billion to train a model?
Yeah, that's an open question. I guess I'd play journalist on this to kind of give the arguments. First off, I thought DeepSeek, I thought it was really overstated. Inflection was using smaller models. Other companies out there were using smaller models. Like, do we really need the huge system to answer all of our questions? No. Why? Let's send some simpler questions to these smaller models. They use less compute. They're cheaper and all. But I think that if you could do it for 1/10 the price, then you're going to make 10 times larger models. I think that's, this thing called Jarvis paradox is kind of dates back to the 19th century in coal, but I think it's true today that, these are engineers. They do it because they can do it. They want to make it as big as they can, but it's an open question. I don't know. I'm convinced that it might not be as expensive as people thought, like as Amadei said with Claude, Anthropic, but on the other hand, I'm convinced it's going to be a lot of money. You know what I mean? Like DeepSeek was cheaper, but it still was millions of dollars. They're a venture-backed outfit with millions of dollars. And there's the training of these things. There's the fine-tuning of these things. But don't forget, there's the operating of these things. These cost a lot of money. In fact, one of the startups I started following in 2023, they were before more or less everyone else on AI-powered search. This goes back to, I think, 2018. They first started working on that. They are holding back features because they're too expensive. They haven't done an update they have because they know if they do it, it's going to bankrupt them on GPU costs, on compute costs. They were doing all these clever marketing things, but they stopped doing that because they were getting too many users and it was costing too much money per month to operate them. And so, it's still really, really, really expensive perhaps it's not $100 billion expensive.
I think there's a kind of mismatch between what many of the AI leaders want out of both robotics and artificial intelligence, and what the public really needs or wants going forward. Because essentially, a lot of this compute power is built around making the chatbot be this very human-like voice that can really understand things in a certain way, and basically just kind of making a person. In robotics, you see humanoid robots with faces, heads, arms, fingers, all that stuff, which why are they doing that? I know their justification. I don't buy it. But basically, I feel like it's not that expensive if you're not trying to create a person, if you're actually trying to make a tool. And if they focused on the things that really matter. For example, like right now, the problem with chatbots is that the output is just very boring and generic. The hallucinations is a well-known problem. They're being gamed by China and all kinds of other nefarious actors deliberately poisoning or polluting the data. And then there are companies that are doing what I think is the work that really needs to be done, like a contextual AI, which has something called a grounded language model. And this is basically designing a chatbot that's optimized for accuracy, not for being a Scarlett Johansson. And also other companies are working on customization. So they're building tools that are designed for you as an enterprise to populate it with your own data, so it's less likely to hallucinate and can be more relevant to you. Those are the directions I'd love to see them pour resources in. And I don't think those cost $100 billion.
I mean, it's very interesting what you're saying. I think you're making a point, but I don't know. Maybe it's me. It's kind of my favorite thing about the pi, the mathematical equation. Is my favorite for the very reasons that you're poo-pooing and saying people don't want. Like, I love that I could just talk to it. I mean, it's voice, so you could literally talk to it.
Right.
And it gets nuance. It gets jokes. It's understands subtlety. It's kind. I think that's what people like about Claude, that it has a little bit of a personality and it's talking to you. So I don't know. I'm not so sure if that's not what people want.
Have you tried Sesame?
I have not.
Sesame is like Pi, but even more so.
That's the one where you talk to the man or the woman and they're very annoying, and I don't like that.
Well, and Pi's annoying in my opinion.
Gary in the book talks about Eliza and its successors, and this Sesame is just the most recent, really amazing version of Eliza, if you ask me. It's a chatbot. We're talking to Gary Rivlin. He's the author of a new book called AI Valley. There it is. Just came out. Simon,
move your finger over. Yeah,
there we go.
The whole thing.
Actually, there's a great tidbit in the book. You were talking about stochastic parrots, Jeff. When Google wanted to buy DeepMind, one of the problems they had, Hasibeis and Suleiman and Shane Legg, their third founder, didn't really want to sell, and Suleiman especially was very. Global in his thinking, very conscious. And one of the conditions, besides the big check, was that Google established an independent ethics and safety board to monitor the development of AGI. That's where Timnit Gebru and Martha Mitchell were working. I don't think Google ever, now Gary, you can confirm or deny this maybe in your own research, really wanted to do this. It was a condition of buying DeepMind, which they really wanted, and they were right. And as soon as they could get rid of Gebru and Mitchell and the ethics board, they did. Do any of these big companies worry about safeties, alignment, AGI, and the future? Are they even, or is that just a little speed bump that they have to do to make everybody comfortable with what's happening?
Yeah, so I mean, you're making some good points. First off, that safety board. Yeah, it met once before they disbanded it. Now, it was very impressive. They had Reid Hoffman, Elon Musk. They had all these big names. Schmidt was on it. Page and Brin. But they showed how important it was by the fact that they dumped it.
I've even talked to people who were at Google at the time who say, "Oh, Timnit Gebru was such a pain in the ass." They didn't like those guys.
That was her job, though.
Well,
No, but I think Jeff's making the point. Like, they wanted to appear like safety was important, but once someone did what they were supposed to do,
they didn't want
which is
that.
like, oh shoot, you're getting our way here. But I think you overstated a little bit, Leo. It's not that they don't care. To me, they care. But they care a lot more about profits.
Right.
They care about the trust issue, but they care a lot more about beating that other company over here. That's, to drill down further, what I said earlier, that my big fear is that big tech is going to dominate. It's that all of that's going to go by the wayside because it becomes all about beating the competition, or I guess you could throw in, it comes down to, we have to beat China. The China card, you just throw down the China card and, the Trump administration's taken off, more or less all of the restrictions on AI. There's kind of
we have to beat China. Yeah.
Because we have to beat China. Yeah. It's kind of the magic words.
Yeah.
So Gary, on the safety, in my view, has been polluted as a word, because there's two very different definitions of it. One is I'll use Gebru again, the stochastic parrot's view of environment and bias and labor and such. And the other is the doomsters. It's the 10 to the 54th future human beings in the universe. And so when people talk about safety, we need a definition as to which they're going for. I'm not a believer that AGI is around the corner or is even a thing. And thus the doomster argument kind of falls apart in my view. I'm curious where you come out with the whole TESCREAL, doomster, that end of safety versus the present tense concerns about environmental impact and so on safety.
Yeah, if I had one wish, I wish we would talk about the real fears. Hoffman uses a phrase, line of sight. There's the stuff that's real that we can see now. Like, yeah, I guess it's possible in 300 years or whatever that laser-eyed robots are going to be a threat to us. But, Hoffman has a nice construct. There's the doomers, of course, and he calls the zoomers, which are the accelerationists, Mark Andreessen I mentioned before, those who say there should be, full speed ahead, no safety, no anything. We just have to, bring this to humanity to help solve problems because AI will, cure everything. I put myself in the category that Hoffman calls the bloomers. I think there's amazing potential for AI around science, around medicine, around education, around a whole host of things. But there are also very real concerns, autonomous, AI weapons in warfare, AI in surveillance. I'm scared. Am I allowed to say shitless? I guess I just did. That it's about autonomous AI. I mean, people have to understand these things are amazing, but they have limits. And the idea that there wouldn't be a human in the loop for anything that really mattered, that's really scary to me. And so, I mean, do you guys kind of, are you more or less on that it's this, autonomous AI that we're going to believe it's more powerful and better and capable? I mean, you hear it with Musk, we want AI, like, I really don't want it making employment decisions. It's a co-pilot. It could help you. I use it in my work as a research assistant. I, let it edit, give me suggestions for editing, but I don't let it write it. It's my companion.
But that's how it is now. I mean, I think the fears, which I'm not a doomer or a zoomer necessarily, more of a perfumer. I make it all sound good and smell good. But the problem is, like, agentic AI is based on objectives. So you basically say, well, here you go, here are your objectives, go do the thing, and it's working 24/7. And you can't really trust people to put the guardrails around something like that. And again, I don't think it's going to be the laser-eyed robots, but I do think that there's going to be some problematic things. I mean, we see today's chatbots cheating, lying, hiring people to get past, CAPTCHAs and things like that. And so I think that you can see risks, and you can also see it being used by North Korea.
That was, again, one of the DeepMind's demands of Google before they were sold to Google, is that they not be used for military applications.
or surveillance.
Too late.
Or surveillance. Yeah,
and
but
Google dropped both of those.
Exactly.
Google dropped both those in 2025.
Exactly.
It started 2025. Yeah.
And Eric Schmidt himself, a former CEO of Google, now has a company
his
that makes
new business.
$400 drones that are fully AI, autonomous AI drones that drop bombs. So, yeah.
I don't think you have to go. So, to answer your question, Gary, we are not in agreement. On the spectrum, I'd say Paris is the most skeptical. Then definitely Jeff is very skeptical about the notion of superintelligence. I would classify myself as an accelerationist. I see no reason to hobble this development. This may be the most important technological development humans make. And I acknowledge the danger. I mean, the danger exists now. Autonomous weapons should scare the pants off of people, especially if they're making kill decisions. And there is no doubt that is what is going on. That's what Palantir's doing. That's what Schmidt's new. It's even what Google is doing. So, and Microsoft. So I think that there is definitely an existential threat to AI, even as it stands, and I think it's not so hard to imagine something even scarier. So I think it is reasonable to consider, what's on the line of sight, but that doesn't mean you can't also think about, well, what are the long-term
even as an accelerationist, which I think makes you more of a bloomer, Leo.
Maybe I'd like to be a perfumer.
You're a blooming bloomer.
If I may, but...
Gary, let me ask you an unfair question. As we get into the problems and things that go wrong. Whom do you trust and whom do you not trust among the AI moguls and
that's
companies?
That's a great question.
Yeah, that is a very hard question. I mean, the simple answer would be startups, but I think Sam Altman is as much a creature of the Valley as the heads of Meta and Google, etc.
Well, in the early days when Musk founded OpenAI, you might have said, "Oh, yeah, Elon's got the right idea," but clearly, Grok is, version 3 of Grok is let's build the biggest, fastest thing we can, and damn the torpedoes, full speed ahead.
Right. But Amode, I think, is the most responsible. It seems to me that Anthropic is still keeping, trust and safety at the center. And, but I make the argument as a strategic thing, you need to pay attention to trust and safety. Go back to the 19th century and look at railroads. People were dying on the railroads. There was, it was just the wild, wild west. There weren't crossings and all the kind of stuff that we have now. And the government put in place standards, and people could trust it. And the railroad took off because it was safe. It wasn't like you're risking your life to ride this thing. And I think the same thing around AI. If you, at least the consumer side of AI, if you want people to use this and pay for the product, they need to trust it. And I think they're really being short-sighted, the more aggressive accelerationists, no gas, all gas, full speed ahead, because right now, polling is showing that the majority of Americans are fearful of AI. And if you get too far ahead, we're going to have social media part 2, where people are...
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Sorry about that. One of the reasons they're fearful, though, is because people get a very skewed view. When they hear about AI, they're hearing about ChatGPT and the chatbots. And I don't really think in the longer term, the chatbots are going to be the most impactful thing. I mean, yes, we'll have them in our smart glasses. We'll be talking to it all day. They'll be conversational like Pi and so on, and they'll be very, very smart and even agentic. But if people did what I think we do, or at least that I do, I'm doing broad searches about AI research, and most of it is, early cancer detection and curing this and solving problems. And the only thing that's going to help us in hospital superbugs and all these things that AI is doing. And I think that if the public, and this is the media's fault, no doubt, but if the public really understood the full breadth of what AI is bringing to the table, there's going to be some problems, but it's going to solve a lot of problems.
I think the media has done a very mediocre job.
I agree
on this. Hoffman joked that they might have gotten 1 week of what you're talking about, the optimism and the potential, before it's going to destroy education because kids are going to use it to widespread use to cheat and all of the scary scenarios. And it seemed far more on the negative than the positive when there are extraordinary things that AI could do. Again, this idea of a co-pilot. Do I want an AI reading mammograms? No, I want a doctor who's smart enough to embrace this technology and use it as a check. And, I think the number I saw, doctors can 93% detect something suspicious in a mammogram, whereas AI is up at 98%. So use it as a check. And so that kind of stuff. I happen to choose a story that the New York Times had, about a week ago. But those are few and far between, those kind of stories. And I do think the public is, as you say, Mike, I agree, that fear is based largely in the media coverage. And we could also throw Hollywood in there. It doesn't make a very good movie if, in the Terminator, they're nice companions and they're useful and they, help us solve some of our problems. It's a much more dramatic, great movie if they take over and then you have to a human being has to save the world from the robots subjugating all of us.
We're talking to Gary Rivlin. The new book, AI Valley, just came out yesterday. Gary's going to go on a tour. He'll be speaking in the Bay Area in the next few weeks, and then to Albany. You live in New York, so I imagine more appearances in New York coming. His website, GaryRivlin.com. You can find out all about this book and his others, including The Plot to Kill Bill Gates. Or I'm sorry, I keep saying kill. Maybe I'm just projecting.
Jeez,
I don't know.
Jeez.
I don't know.
I'm looking forward to the sequel. So you want to kill Bill Gates?
The AI is going to have a field day with that. There's so many things I would love to talk to you. We've already overstayed our time, I'm sorry to say, but the book is really fun to read. I stayed up late. And there's a lot of course, in those of us who've lived through this stuff recognize a lot of stuff. And there's also a lot of insight, things happening that we didn't know, including the story behind the OpenAI pooch, and the return of Sam Altman. And, it's a very interesting time. And this is one of the reasons we kind of recast this show as, Intelligent Machines, because I think this is right now the most interesting story in tech. We thank you for the book, Gary. And thank you.
Thanks so much.
I appreciate it. Yeah.
This was a lot of fun. I appreciate it, guys.
Yeah.
Congratulations on the book.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks. Thanks, Gary. Take care. Hey, it's Leo Laporte. I hope you've enjoyed this little clip from our programming at TWiT.tv. For more, visit our website, TWiT.tv, or subscribe in your favorite podcast client. There's also a link somewhere down there.